Chief Tsunka Waka Sapa, Chief Tsunka Waka Sapa, also Philip Scott, Caballo Negro, Black Horse. Thank you very much, Chief, for joining us today, and thank you for joining us from your place in California.
It's a pleasure to be with you today, Juan Pablo, and blessed full moon lunar eclipse.
Absolutely. It's going to be a very prosperous and propitious day. I suppose you're going to have a special ceremony today.
That's correct. So this evening, the community and I will be gathering here at the Institute, and we will be honoring the blood moon and the lunar eclipse.
Wonderful, Chief. So I would like to start, Chief, by asking a little bit about yourself. Did you get involved in this native path, and for how long have you been living this special and particular way of life?
Well, my first big medicine dreams started when I was 6 years old, where I was being visited by ancestors from the dream time. And then when I was 7, I had a near-death experience, and as a consequence of that opening, I was able to see and experience the spirits in ordinary time, the ancestors here within this plane of awareness. And then from 7 to 17, I was educated in my dream time by them. I was also a sleepwalker, so I could walk between the worlds, see both realities simultaneously. And then when I was 17, I was introduced to some indigenous teachings, at which point I made a formal commitment to walk the red road. And so I have been on this road ever formally with a sincere intent and commitment since the age of 17. And I went off to college, but I also soon afterward began to embark on a career as a professional ballet dancer after my undergraduate studies, all the while still being trained by the spirits in the dream time. And while I was in Europe, actually, attempting to dance professionally, I was introduced to people that were participating in indigenous ceremony, and as a consequence was therefore formally initiated. And we would, or the group rather, would bring indigenous people from Scandinavia, known as a Sami, and bring the Sami people down, who were the last extant indigenous group in Europe, and along with the Basque people in the Pyrenees between France and Spain, who have had an unbroken lineage of their indigenous traditions. And so I was, training with some Sami medicine people. And as a result of some professional challenges, because when I went to Europe, I started off in a B class company rather than A class, and so it became a professionally dead end for me. And so I was invited to move up to Scandinavia to attempt to become professionally engaged up there. And as a consequence, I was accepted into an A-class company, the Norwegian National Ballet. And the medicine person that was training us in Central Europe, down in Switzerland, he gave me a contact. And so I found this individual who was residing in Oslo, and he was from above the Arctic Circle, he and his people. And he was creating charter schools and attempting to protect the sovereignty of his culture. And as fortune would have it, his office, where he did perform healings, as well as would counsel people and do his writings and his advocacy for his people, was only 1 block from the theater. So every day after work, I would spend time with him, and he was more of a colleague. And as a consequence, he had a community of people that would gather regularly for ceremony. And it was there that I encountered an expat American living in Norway who was an Ojibwe sun dancer and had been given permission from his chief in North Dakota to conduct purification lodges. And so my first indigenous Native American purification lodge was in Norway. And as a consequence, he also had colleagues, a mentor who was Uten Pueblo. And when I encountered this man as he was traveling around the world conducting ceremony, and he came to Norway, I recognized that this was a teacher, this was the mentor that I was waiting my whole life for. And so I offered tobacco and blanketed him, which is a traditional way of requesting a mentor and medicine teacher. And he accepted me, which put me on my journey formally with a mentor. And so I traveled the world with him whenever I could, between dancing professionally and so in my spare time. I was traveling the world with him, doing purification lodges, long dances, drum dances. And as a consequence of some of these ceremonies, I received a vision. And in this vision, I was instructed to sundance. And an eagle came down and sunk its talons into my chest and lifted me off the ground. And of course, at the time, I didn't understand or know what that actually symbolized and meant. And so I took it to him, and he informed me that this was a Sundance dream. And he also is a Sundance chief. He's quite advanced in his age, but he's still alive. He is also a shapeshifter. He can change form at will. And I do believe perhaps his longevity is attributed to the mastery he has as a shapeshifter. But I wanted to Sundance with him. However, in his tradition, they do not pierce. And so he actually encouraged me to honor my dream and to find a piercing Sundance. And so I inquired with my friend who had introduced me to the lodge in Norway, and he took it to his chief. And his chief informed him that they were closing the ceremony to the outsiders. And however, he did have a relationship with a matriarch, a Sundance mother in South Dakota. So I wrote her a letter explaining my vision. She took it to the Sundance chief in South Dakota on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and I was given entry to begin Sundancing there, which is about 34 years ago. So I have been Sundancing every year since that time, sometimes in more than one dance. And also, as a consequence, it opened up doorways for me to also experience the medicine of the Native American church. And so I've been actively involved with that for at least 28 years as well. And
This
so,
gives us a good segue because I think that many of our guests or the person who are seeing this may have heard a few terms that to me are not uncommon, but to the majority of the people might be. Let me start by asking to clarify a basic term that you mentioned, dream time and ordinary time. What's the difference between them and what's not different among them?
so we have multiple worlds and dreams in which we dwell. And there's the ordinary waking world, which is also a dream. However, it is the common exchange that we have as human beings in the ordinary time. And then we have the dream time. And so the dream time is, when we're not vertical, but rather when we're horizontal, meaning lying down and perhaps falling asleep at night, we enter into what's called the dream time. And the dream time are other realities that exist independent of this one as well. Now, there is an intimate relationship to them. However, we have a dreaming body, we have an energy body, and as a consequence, when we depart our physical body by a thread, by a tether, which the Hmong Bushmen in the Kalahari call ropes to God, right? So through trance dancing, through ceremony, through sleep, our energy body or our dreaming body, also known as the double, will depart the physical body. However, there'll be a thread which anchors us into the physical body while we're still alive. And at the moment of passing, then that particular thread is severed for us to travel to the other worlds upon death. But when we're still alive, then we can travel into these other realities, these other dreams where we can interact. And so that's what's known as the dream time. And then, of course, we have our ordinary waking world, and which is usually the way that individuals will interact with each other. And so, through our sleep, through ceremony, through meditation, through prayer, through fasting, these are all ways that we shift our awareness. And of course, we can also ingest sacraments or sacred plant medicines, all of which will shift our awareness that allow these other realities to open up, because it gives us access to the ancestors and to the spirits. And this is where we can communicate with the other worlds and receive direction and instruction. We also have what's called the hamblecha, which is a traditional vision quest, which is fasting without food and water and sleep for 4 days and 3 nights, or 4 days and 4 nights. And as a consequence of that privation, it opens us up to be able to receive instruction and guidance and visitation from the spirits that constantly watch over us and protect us and guide us. And sadly, in our ordinary waking world, we're often not cognizant of that. We're not aware of the presence of the holy ones, the ancestors and the spirits that are here to guide us in our human walk.
And I believe, Chief, that's the next logic question here. And it is our relationship with the sacred. We live in a world where we are separated from the sacred by many means. We are unaware of this sacredness, even when people practice religions. Some people has learned to use religion as a tool to avoid certain responsibilities. But being aware of the sacred gives you a different perspective of reality. Can you explain that a little bit more, and how this sacred word is related to our, and how we relate to it?
Well, the phrase that I often share is that it's necessary for us to allow the world to divinize before our eyes, which means that we are constantly in the state of the divine. We're constantly in the state of the sacred. We walk upon Mother Earth. Mother Earth is a sacred, living, sentient being. And each person here is not just comprised of physical matter, but rather we are comprised of spirit and energy and intent. And so we need to be aware and cognizant of how everything is interconnected together, through the, shall we say, the luminous fibers, that everything has an energy and a spirit, and we're all connected. And so, as my Lakota mother would often share, she would say every step a prayer, right? Every step is an awareness of the sacredness of our walk through life, of the sacredness of our words that we articulate to others and to the world in general. And so, as a consequence of the awareness of the interconnectivity of all of creation, as well as the sacredness that is imbued, because the source, creator, or whatever word you want to use to describe the ineffable and the mystery, breathes the breath of life into all of creation. And so all beings are sentient, all beings are alive and aware, and we are a part of this world. And therefore, to bring that level of respect and reverence and awareness to the earth, to each being that dwells on this earth with us, as well as the presence of the ancestors who watch over us and guide us through dream and sign and vision and omen. All of this helps us to live with the fundamental respect and reverence necessary for life on this planet.
As I've been studying with you, Chief, throughout the years, not constantly, we have our on and offs during this period, but as I travel my portion of the path, I've found myself many times finding the sacred in my path, even if I'm looking for it. It has a tendency to show up and and tell us what's going on, even when we are trying to move away from it. Following the native path, what does it entail for a regular person? If someone here is listening to this conversation and may find something that you have said already enlightening, what would be the process for a person to start and then continue to follow a native path?
That's another really important question, Juan Pablo. So for me, the Red Road, which is the way of the human being, is available to all people. So my mentors, my teachers have never shared that this is just exclusive, right? Because we are all what's called Lakota Chewi Chasha, all common, ordinary human beings. We all have the capacity to walk the Red Road, to cultivate an intimate relationship with the earth and with the unseen. And my encouragement is that if people are sincerely intent upon following or walking the Red Road, that they find a mentor. They find an individual who is qualified and sanctioned to be able to conduct the ceremonies that are commensurate with their particular family or tradition, and to humble oneself, just like when you wish to embark on a martial art, right? There is the seeking of a sensei, of a master within whatever martial art tradition you're drawn to, and that you humble yourself to be able to learn, because the Red Road is a long path. It requires perseverance, it requires patience and discipline, and because there is much to master and to learn, to eventually, and of course there's no guarantee, to be granted permission to conduct ceremony oneself. And of course, it requires the blessings of one's mentors and teachers and elders. And it's a long and arduous journey and road that requires what I regard as deep excavation. Because in order to be a healer, one has to do one's own inner work first. And that's certainly the beauty of this sacred way of life and the ceremonies that are part and parcel for the indigenous tradition, because they're inseparable, right? So as my Lakota mother would say, every step of prayer. So for us, prayer and ceremony is as important as food and water and sleep and clothing and shelter and all the fundamental necessities for human survival. So for us, that's why we will go without food and water and sleep, and supplant those with a focus upon prayer and meditation and ceremony, because that is also nourishment. And so in order to gain this level of mastery requires tutelage, requires apprenticeship. And as I said, this is a long journey. So in all of my travels throughout the world, speaking with other ceremonial leaders and elders, wisdom keepers, and vision seekers, it requires at least a minimum of 10 years of apprenticeship and arduous training before one is qualified and sanctioned to be able to conduct ceremony and regard him, her, or theirselves as medicine people.
What is, Chief, based on what we've just learned, then, what is the purpose of this path? What is to achieve? What is to be achieved?
Well, ultimately, as a consequence of walking this path, one receives freedom, spiritual freedom, liberation from oneself. And of course, I'm not referring to the negation or destruction of the ego, but rather one is free from the shackles of social familial conditioning. So there's a liberation from patterns and addictions and a sense of perception that is often based upon victimization. And so we also take ourselves less personally. We're able to be in the world with a sense of greater ease and freedom. And of course, ultimately, the other aspect of this path is for one to find one's original instructions, one's original medicine. Each and every one of us is brought here to fulfill a specific mission and purpose. And often our social and educational systems will blind us to what our purpose and reason and mission for being here is. And so the red road, the native path, the way of the human being is a vehicle through which we can discover who we are and what we're to bring and contribute to the whole.
In that sense, Chief, once we begin this path and we are in the process of finding our original instructions, as you just said, we as individuals have to overcome our limitations and use our tools that have been given to us from the moment we're born in order to achieve this goal. In that sense, how do you propose us to continue this path using those two bundles that come together at the moment of birth?
Yes, so often when I go on the hill, meaning and undertake a traditional quest or participate in my annual sun dances, I'll often ask, what is our purpose for being here? And that's what the spirits imparted to me, was that at the moment of conception, when mystery merges with matter, we are bequeathed two bundles. And there's a blessing bundle and a burden bundle. And inside the blessing bundle are all the gifts and attributes and talents of our families of origin, both maternally and paternally. And then there's also the burden bundle. And inside the burden bundle are all the fears, wounds, traumas, issues, addictions, and patterns of our families of origin on both of these lineages. And as we gain the gift of mobility and movement and thought and speech, these bundles will burst open. And we'll have a chance to see all of the great beauty and gifts that our families offer, but also as well as the things that require our attention. And perhaps a time will come in the evolution of that individual where they will say, enough is enough. I will no longer carry this burden of the legacy that's been passed to me. And so then we embark upon healing. And so we dive into that burden bundle and we have a chance to see all of that which is not so pleasant to look at. And healing is never a comfortable proposition. And so we utilize the tools that are available within that blessing bundle, as well as what we have accumulated, our wisdom and our skills that we've accumulated in our lifetime, to extract one or two of the items from that burden bundle. Because we will never be able to expunge everything from that bundle, because those bundles go back to the beginning of our collective humanity. But often, based upon our experiences, maybe we have been exposed to addiction, for example, in our families growing up. So that's what we're going to be concentrating on, for example. And so we extract these items so that we liberate ourselves from slumber and from fear and from addictions and patterns that keep us stuck and keep us in a place that engenders obstacles, as well as continue to sabotage our quest for freedom and liberation and joy and passion in this brief time that we have on this earth. We have to understand that the reality of this planet is impermanence, and so therefore it's really important for what I call the awakened warrior is to allow his, her, or their awareness of death to galvanize them to act with impeccability moment to moment.
Now, to act with impeccability would be a great purpose in life, in my sense, because it would imply that as a human being, you are trying your best to be a human being and to be also a steward of the land. which is also part of what we are. We live, Chief, in a world that is taking us constantly away from this understanding, is constantly pushing us away from a path that we may have as a purpose. And this not only for people who may follow or not the native path, but anyone who follows the spiritual road. What would be a recommendation from your side to anyone who is listening to this conversation? I would like to remain in this particular set of purpose in life and not run away from them, which is a tendency. We all tend to kind of go to the easy side, go to the comfortable side, return to our patterns. How do we overcome those issues in order for us to be able to follow the path that we've chosen or we've been given?
I sincerely believe that the modern world has become soft around the spiritual middle, so to speak. And as you rightly pointed out, this need for comfort, right? And it's important that there's a sense of safety in our lives and what we desire. However, I think that oftentimes there's a certain laziness that has been engendered, right? This need for constant comfort, and I'm reminded of So for me. We live in a completely conscious, sentient universe. So there's no unconsciousness, but what we do have is a continuum of awareness from sleep to full wakefulness. And for me, that continuum is contingent upon one word, which is work. Okay? That we have to do the inner work necessary to liberate ourselves from these shackles and from this inertia of slumber. Okay. And that work is what your spiritual practices are, the discipline. And of course, I'm not attached to whatever path has called you. Right? There are many paths to liberation and awakening. But once the path beckons, it's important to follow it fully and faithfully. And so one's discipline, and of course, I'm referring to the discipline of the warrior, which is not an externalized force or pressure, but it's an inner drive. Okay, so it's cultivating the discipline of the warrior, which is predicated on passion, right? A desire to expand and to seek freedom and liberation and joy and awareness. And so for me, that's the key, that whatever your own spiritual practices are, that you fully engage them daily. Right? We are bombarded in a world of extreme distraction. Okay? There's always things that can be done. And so for me, that discipline is being able to turn off the phone, right? Not to engage the television, to sit in meditation, to be in prayer, to spend time out in nature without any sort of stimulation from the outside, as in some kind of radio or phone. I find it very disconcerting that there are people walking down the street with their phones in front of their faces rather than taking in the beauty around them, right? And so for me, this serves as a distraction that actually fundamentally keeps us disconnected from ourselves, from each other, from the earth. Personally, I find it reprehensible that in today's world, there is not a willingness to engage in dialogue, to have difficult conversations. We live in a world of disposability, right? And so it's much easier when you have a disagreement with someone to cast them aside or to eliminate any relationship via text or Facebook or email, rather than being able to engage and have dialogue, because dialogue is the ground through which peace and understanding and healing can be achieved.
You mentioned something that has been an obsession in my life. You talk about freedom as an achievable goal. When I was growing up, I had a very simple conception or conceptualization about freedom, very easy. Freedom is to do whatever I want. And in a way, that would be an easy definition of freedom. But then when you realize later on that when you do whatever you want without any restraints, you basically do nothing. You end up not achieving many goals because limiting your time, putting your time and effort in a specific task is what will eventually give you the task accomplished, something that you very difficultly or with a lot of difficulty might achieve on your own without any guidance. So to me, it was a big surprise later in life to realize that discipline and freedom are intimately related one to the other. In order to achieve freedom, one has also to achieve discipline, not all kinds of disciplines, but specific ones that one needs. Now, we live in a world where the world has learned to create new disciplines and new tasks for people to do in a way that interrupt the personal disciplines. How do we defeat this? You mentioned the cell phone, for example. The cell phone has created new customs, new patterns in our behavior, and are taking us away from personal relationships, for example, or our relationship to the nature, the real world. So how do we fight these without us becoming isolated or without us becoming away from society? How do we kind of balance one and the other in order to continue a spiritual path in a very complicated, non-spiritual kind of environment?
Well, I think that you gave the antidote already. It's all about balance, right? So, we need to balance our worlds. So we need to be willing to turn off the cell phone while we're engaging in dinner with friends or family. I'm not saying that we should be eliminating technology altogether, but rather, again, it's all about moderation. That's the key. And so, but also being able to have healthy boundaries with ourselves, for example, because oftentimes, I will ask my students to refrain from engaging, from imbibing alcohol or from using their cell phones in ceremony, for example. And oftentimes they find that very challenging. And so our behaviors often can contribute to our habits and our addictions. So part of that discipline that we're speaking about, and of course the word discipline comes from discipleship, which means about becoming a lover of learning. It's being able to be even mindful of establishing healthy boundaries in terms of our own conduct, so we're not reinforcing unhealthy habits and behaviors and patterns rather. I do want to kind of segue from what you had shared a little bit about freedom. For me, simply stated, freedom is absence of concern for yourself. That for me is true freedom spiritually. When you have liberated yourself from the shackles of fear, you've supplanted fear with faith that you're being taken care of, that means you can be selfless, you can let go. In the colonized world, the definition of freedom is what you had shared earlier in terms of your youth and your understanding at that stage of your life, which is, I want to do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it. But you see, that for me is not freedom. That's tantamount to selfishness and a lack of awareness of how our words, our actions can impact the people around us in this interconnected world that we're in. And so fundamentally, true freedom is absence of concern for yourself, which is selflessness and the ability to sacrifice. And for me, that is true freedom. So we have this, shall we say, tension or conflict between an indigenous understanding of freedom, which is what I just shared, and the colonized one, which is really based upon the illusion of independence and selfishness. And that's, for example, what we had with this pandemic, right? So this virus, this elder, this teacher brought us the opportunities to learn some very important lessons. One, to learn about healthy boundaries, about that bubble, that space, right? to learn how to respect each other, but more importantly, also to learn how to take care of each other, right? So again, there is the whole issues about mask mandates, but if you really care about other people, then you're going to safeguard them. And so the wearing of the mask is not an issue because we are all in this together. And so we're going to make sure that we protect our elders and our youth, right? We're also going to take care of ourselves in the process. Whereas, this notion that, no one can teach, tell me how, to wear a mask really, again, reinforces this illusion of independence and this selfish model that we find ourselves in, which is also why we have such destruction upon the earth, right? That we as a species are not understanding our collective responsibility to protect and watch over the earth, to be responsible stewards of all life on this planet. Not that we're the zenith of creation, quite the contrary. We're the youngest, we're the grandchildren, we're the last to be created here. And so we need to take care of our elders. We need to take care of the earth and each other.
It seems to me, as you mentioned now, I was going a different way, but this is something that I find fascinating at this point. This perception that we have in regards to how do we relate to the world in this contrast. I noticed that the new technologies that were supposed to open the door to new connections, and they have worked as such. You and I are connecting from thousands of miles away, thank you to this technology. But this same technology is what is being used today to separate us, to keep us away from each other. So in this struggle between getting together and finding each other and learning these lessons that that life has for us, is in contradiction to what the power seems to be expecting from us. Work, 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 don't relate to others, just keep producing, keep consuming, and don't worry about the rest because the rest is not your problem. And this has created such a division, such a polarization of the world that is very difficult to overcome. Is there something you can tell us, Chief, that in a way can help us reach out and find others that might not be willing to take our hand? Because we're finding this more and more. I mean, as life goes on, as this world turns around, the division and the separation is wider and wider. How do we reach out to the other side, if necessary, to heal?
So I see the issues of global warming as a product. So there's this profound inflammation that's happening in the earth, and through the raising of global temperatures. And so the earth is heating up, and as a consequence, we see all of the warfare that is occurring globally, right? Not just in Ukraine, but in other parts of the world as well. And we also see this often in our interpersonal lives, the escalation of conflict and strife and disagreement. And I do see this as a consequence of the inflammation that's happening globally, both within individuals as well as in the earth herself. And the antidote for me to this, how we can bring this cooling down, is through our spiritual practices to achieve a sense of inner peace, right? So the peace that we can achieve through whatever our spiritual practices are not only cools, say, the anger and the inflammation within ourselves, but it also provides a certain kind of opening and curiosity for us to be able to engage with people whom we may not necessarily agree with. And that's, for me, what I mentioned about earlier, being able to cultivate the courage to have difficult conversations. Because in the Lakota understanding, at the conclusion of our prayers, we say, Mitakuye Oyasin. That means all my relations. So we are all family here, and we're all in this together. And so it's really necessary for us to be able to come together, to have dialogue, even to agree to disagree, right? We're not always going to necessarily have accord, but if we are denying the truth of others, or we are discarding those whom we don't agree with, then all that does is it continues to escalate the possibility of strife and conflict and poison in this world. And so uh, being able to have the conversations, making sure that we cool our own inner aggressions and fires and violence, right? That is the key. In addition, again, it's all about balance and moderation. So I think it's time, you spoke about the technology that we have right now to be able to communicate. So, there was actually a prophecy that spoke about that grandmother spider would weave the web of creation again. And so we have the World Wide Web, right? And so that was prophesized. And so, technology isn't inherently evil or negative, but rather is it measured and is it balanced, right? So, for example, many of our children and the youth today I track being socially inept, right? They're unable to communicate with peers or with elders because they're lacking the skill sets of socialization because they're so fixated on their phones and on video games exclusively. Am I saying that this technology is evil um, or not conducive or productive? No, there's actually a lot of value. For example, we have, as we're still in the midst of this pandemic, although our relationship to it is changing. But we had Zoom, we had ways of connection, even though we were essentially isolated. And so there is certainly value and uh, productivity that's possible through right relationship with technology. But again, we also have to ensure that it's based upon sustainability so that we are not mining the earth, for example, which is going to be harming her for the creation of these new technologies. And so it's a double-edged sword, right? There's certainly intrinsic value to the technologies that we have that allow and foster greater connection, but we also have to we're ensuring that we have a balanced and measured approach so that the technology is not enslaving us.
You mentioned a very nice analogy in regards to what's the current situation of Earth as a swollen Earth because of the inflammation we have caused. And then you call us upon looking for our own cooling down of our own emotions and our relationship with the world. However, this is a world in conflict, and the warrior is not someone who runs away from the war. On the contrary, it will be the one who goes up front. How do we balance this cooling down with the need for action? Let me give you an example. Right now, there is a new situation that is generated because the big companies are looking to extract oil from sacred lands. So Native people need to organize and they need to act upon this in order to not permit this to happen. It is a constant struggle. It has been a struggle with victories and defeats, but it's a constant struggle. So my question is, how do we balance between cooling down, being calm, understanding, comprehending what's going on, with this other need to act and defend the land, for example, or defend the weak, defend the people who are suffering because of the actions of others?
Wonderful question, Juan Pablo. There's a difference between action and reaction. Okay? So for me, the warrior acts, the warrior does not react, right? I look, for example, at what transpired in Standing Rock with the opposition to the pipeline that was being constructed through sacred lands. And I visited there and I supported that movement. And the key to that victory, and it has been victorious in that now there's a moratorium on the construction as the arena of conflict moved from the direct opposition on the land to the legal environment. And basically the Army Corps of Engineers must now reevaluate its assessments, that movement was peaceful and prayerful. So we're talking about nonviolence. Okay? We're not talking about violence. We're not talking about aggression. You know? I think it's important that we allow and honor our emotions. So yes, we can be indignant, we can be angry, but we don't allow the anger to morph into violence, because that we're ultimately going to defeat ourselves, right? So, and that's actually some of the teachings in the martial arts, right? That we're not going to allow ourselves to be blinded by violence and aggression, right? Because then the other opponent can be victorious. And so therefore, we maintain actually a sense of sobriety, right? A sense of awareness, right? And we fully feel our emotions. We feel our indignation. We feel the anger toward the injustices of this world. But rather than from a place of reaction and violence, we are going to act with sobriety, with intent, with awareness, so that we can achieve our outcome, right? And so we have great awakened warriors throughout the ages, like Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi and others, who have exemplified nonviolence as a way to achieve our ends. And similarly, what transpired in Standing Rock and other occupations in Native country. I think about, for example, a dear brother of mine in Canada who was opposing the Kimberly Morgan pipeline that was going to be moving through his territory. And it was done with great skill and finesse and awareness, and they were successful as a result of not allowing allowing violence and aggression to take hold of them, and therefore to lose their sobriety and their awareness.
Now, there was something that you mentioned in the middle of the conversation in regards to the search for guidance. And you mentioned that it is important to look for a qualified and sanctioned guide when we are in this pursuit. Can you clarify that a little bit? Because we live also in a world where there is every kind of offer outside, and people either tend to go to the tradition of their family, or in their search, in their personal search, they might find people who are not really qualified to be healers or qualified to be teachers. What would be your recommendation, and why do you think that we should be looking for people who have been sanctioned?
Well, the analogy is, if you're going to have, say, someone perform surgery for you, I'm trusting that you're going to find a qualified, board certified surgeon who's been properly vetted by their organization, the American Medical Association, for example. You know, indigenous, the Red Road is a medicine way. And as I said, there is training that is required to be sanctioned, to receive the blessing of one's elders and families and teachers. And without that proper qualification, you have negligence. And there has been many instances of people who think that they're qualified, or perhaps through their own self-importance, believe that they have the chops and the skills to be able to conduct ceremony without proper training, which leads to disastrous results and tremendous harm. I mean, I reside in the San Francisco Bay Area and do quite a bit of damage control, because people go to so-called shamans who are not qualified, who haven't been taught properly, and the individuals are harmed in the process. So it's important that you vet, the medicine person, that there's questions that you pose. How long have they been on the road? What is the extent of their training? Who has trained them? Did they receive the blessing and the sanction to conduct the ceremonies? How long have they participated in these ceremonies? How long have they been conducting these ceremonies? Do they understand the protocols? There are many elaborate protocols when it comes to ceremony that requires years and years of training. And so, there's a whole slew of questions that I encourage people to pose to individuals whom they wish to sit in ceremony with, because you're literally putting your life on the line, right? And so, that medicine person has to understand the gravity of what it means to be able to conduct these ceremonies. And unfortunately, in our Western colonized world, people are willing to take many shortcuts. And as I said earlier, it requires a minimum of 10 years of apprenticeship to become a bona fide qualified medicine person in indigenous cultures. And oftentimes I see people wanting to take many shortcuts and to decrease the amount of time to be able to offer this. And the analogy that I use is like, people will go to South America and experience an ayahuasca ceremony and then come back and feel that they're somehow qualified to conduct them without understanding the years and years of relationship that's cultivated with these plant medicines, and the rigors of apprenticeship that are required to understand the nuances and the protocols that come with any ceremony that's performed traditionally. And so I really encourage your listeners and those that are viewing this to be careful, because it may cost you your life, if you are with someone who is not properly sanctioned and qualified to conduct the ceremony. And that's the gravity that we bring to this work. And there are, for myself, and this may be a little problematic, part of what I do here at my institute is I'm really on a quest to decolonize shamanism, right? Shamanism has become very fashionable these days. But for me, the only individuals that can call themselves shamans are the medicine people of the Siberian Asian steppe, because that's where that word and that medicine way comes from. Now, the other individuals who can properly call themselves that would be individuals who may not necessarily come directly from that culture, but who have been trained and are sanctioned and receive the blessings of the medicine people from that Asian Siberian steppe. Those are the individuals that can call themselves shamans. And so part of my quest here is to help individuals learn respect for indigenous ways, right? That in North America, there are many, say, in the Lakota culture, for example, there are 7 words to describe the various medicine people and the responsibilities that they have. Not one of those words is shaman, right? So many different indigenous cultures have their own words to describe their medicine people. And rather than using the Western anthropological word, which has been extracted from the tongueless people of Siberia to describe all medicine people everywhere, that we have respect not only for the Asian Siberian steppe practitioners, the medicine people that have their own cosmology and culture and language and their own protocols for their ceremonies, rather than using that blanket term, that we gain respect for the indigenous peoples and the sophistication that they have of their own ceremonies from their own traditions.
There is and we're about to get to the end of this conversation, Chief, but I don't want to close without, again, establishing a relationship between the sacred and the political. We live in times where the religious realm seems to be entering again the political arena. This is being motivated more than by politics than by religion itself. But it seems to have a special force, a special strength, and it has consequences like the recent decisions by the Supreme Court that are going to affect many lives and whatever is coming on. So how do we, again, search for a balance between our religious beliefs or our spiritual practices and how these beliefs and practices can be useful and helpful in our decisions in politics, but not necessarily an imposition to others, which is what I'm seeing now. Is like some people believe that their religion gives them the right to impose their values and perspectives, and even the religion onto others. And I think that that has generated lots of conflict, and it has complicated our relationships to each other. How do we achieve that balance between what we believe religiously or spiritually and our political beliefs? How do we balance those?
Well, what ultimately you're speaking to is proselytizing, right? So the issue is that there's been, that oftentimes the oppressors, and I use that word, in a way that really denotes colonization, right? That the colonizers brought their own religion here to, say, North America, and as a consequence, there wasn't the accord or the agreement to follow those kind of values because indigenous people had their own way of relating to the sacred, and as a consequence, there was genocide. We see the same issue playing itself out now, right? In terms of Roe v. Wade, right? That there's this suppression of the feminine, there's a denigration of the earth. I mean, we might as well call a spade a spade. That ultimately we're talking about the oppression of women and their rights to their own sovereignty, to their own body autonomy. And so again, we have the same, shall we say, issue playing itself out, that certain religious ideology is imposing and oppressing people's rights. And this has been a common theme for hundreds of years here in North America. And, I think about, for example, the American Indian movement, right? That, and also what transpired also in Standing Rock, right? It was from a sacred spiritual position, but there was a collective agreement in terms of how they spiritually engaged with the world to affect change, right? But the indigenous people were not forcing indigenous spirituality, toward the colonizers or toward the people that were with the agenda of constructing the pipeline, for example. It wasn't like they were trying to change their own values, but rather to honor their own sovereignty and their rights. And that's what we see happening today, with 3/4 of the American populace in support of the continuation of Roe v. Wade, for example, right? So fundamentally, to answer your question, we're talking about respect. We're talking about respect of people's sovereignty, of their rights to be able to choose their trajectory and their direction in terms of their own physical sovereignty and autonomy, right? That it's not anyone's position to be able to force other people, your own agenda or values down other people's throats or into their minds, right? That each person has their own sovereignty to connect to the sacred however they are compelled, right? And, that if there are issues that they need to be addressed in an arena that allows for proper dialogue and listening to take place, right? And therefore also to agree to disagree, right? But again, we're talking about proselytizing. We're talking about the forcing of people to adopt another point of view that may not be in resonance to them, right? So we have, for example, like with my Lakota mother, right, being abducted from her family, placed in a boarding school, the atrocities that she endured and witnessed amongst her peers, right, through the intent to indoctrinate. And, there was a phrase that we're going to kill the Indian and save the man. That was the agenda, right? Therefore, by the inculcation of Christian values into their worldviews and their beliefs, which are often antithetical, in terms of a love and a reverence to the earth and the ancestors, and not necessarily just one Christian God, for example, right? And so, Gandhi said something very important, which is if you're going to be spiritual, you're going to be political, right? And so, but what did Gandhi do? Kind of going back to what I shared earlier, his phrase was "Take your enemies to lunch," right? Which means what? That you're willing to sit down, you're willing to share a meal, you're willing to communicate, right? And that's really what's key, is that we have to be willing not to try to force someone into our perspective, but for there to be understanding, right? You may not necessarily have a chord, but nevertheless, each person has their right to the way that they perceive the world and experience the world, and that's indisputable.
Chief, the time has run. We've reached an hour of conversation, and I know that we could spend years talking to you and learning even more. I've spent some months at least. I want to thank you for your time, and I want to ask you one last question. Is there something that you still want to share with our community, those who are viewing or listening to this conversation?
Well, it's been an honor to share with you, Juan Pablo, and prayerfully we'll be able to have future conversations as well. This for me was a rich exchange, and I look forward to the possibility of sharing with your listeners and viewers again. I think that my encouragement is for everyone to decolonize. Right? We need to be willing to stop this incessant domestication of ourselves and the world so that we can achieve freedom, right? And to cultivate the courage, and the word cœur is French for heart, right? To really cultivate the courage and the heart to be able to discover our own sovereignty, our own original medicine, to cultivate the work, to dive deep into the liberation of our wounds, fears, issues by confronting them, right? Confronting them with compassion and kindness and awareness, and to be willing not only to heal ourselves, but to heal the world by having rich conversations that can yield understanding, and for all of us in this time to band together in solidarity to protect the earth so that there is a future for 7 generations of all of our relations and beyond. Because if we don't work right now, if we do not focus collectively on helping to heal the earth and to mitigate this unsustainable trajectory that we're on through this incessant consumption, right? If we're not able to temper that, then the future looks rather bleak for future generations. And so for me, this is our primary objective collectively.
If you want to continue the conversation and continue to decolonize your soul, you can contact Chief Tsunka Waka Sapa through this webpage, facebook.com/ancestral voice, which is the name of the institute that Chief has founded. Chief, thank you very much for your time, for your blessings, for your knowledge, and I hope that other people had the opportunity to learn a little bit from you as well.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. If they would like to contact me by phone, I'm certainly open to that as well. I love to receive texts, and obviously coming from oral traditions, I love that. So, and with your permission, I'd like to share a contact number.
Please go ahead.
So it's 415-310-0981, and individuals can contact me by text, or they can reach out through voicemail, and I will be happy to engage with them.
That's the number, 415-310-0981. You can text Chief and he'll reply to you, and you can establish a relationship with him and continue the dialogue and continue to decolonize your soul. Thank you very much, Chief, and have a wonderful Sunday and a beautiful ceremony tonight.
Thank you. Many blessings, and blessed full moon lunar eclipse and blood red moon.
Aho.
Aho.
Muchas gracias a todos ustedes. Thank you very much. This is Juan Pablo Salas saying goodbye today. continue your path. And thank you for paying attention to this conversation. Have a great day.